Dead by Daylight's player base is at war with each other. Don't get me wrong, there hasn't been any sudden drama or anything new like that. Things have always been like this, and it's also the case for tons of other multiplayer games too. Like in Overwatch 2, supports have been considered public enemy number 1 for most of the sequel's lifespan. But DBD's player base has historically been at each other's throats far more intensely than other games. The reason why had everyone stumped, myself included. All of these different polar opposite opinions that people will defend to the death. It just doesn't make sense. I frequently found myself asking, are we even playing the same game? And I've come to realize the answer is no, we're not playing the same game, at least most of the time. And all of these polar opposite opinions can technically be correct at the same time. Let me explain. There are various different factors that go into a match in DBD which can drastically affect who wins, how fun it is, and how frustrating it is. Many, if not most of which, are entirely out of your control. All of these different factors effectively serve as different ingredients in the Dead by Daylight soup, and in each match you can find yourself getting different combinations of these ingredients, giving you a different experience each time. And many people form their opinion on the game's balance and fun factors based on which DBD soups they find themselves getting most frequently, and as a result, their opinion would make perfect sense for the particular soups that they keep getting, but makes no sense at all for the experience somebody else is getting. Let's start off with the age-old argument, killers are OP or survivors are OP. These statements can mean so many different things, some of which are far more understandable than others. Nurse being OP? Sure, I can't argue with that, but someone like Myers or Legion being OP? That's not such an understandable point to make, which brings us to my first point, blanket statements. Someone could say that killers are OP and they might only really be referring to Nurse, Blight, and those few at the very top end of the roster because they're the only ones they ever find themselves playing against. But of course, if someone else were to read that statement, they would assume that they're saying every killer is OP, which would then mean that those two people end up arguing over that one statement, which has a different meaning depending on their point of view. It sounds silly, but this is the sort of stuff that happens. Person 2 would be right in seeing the claim killers are OP and then assuming that it means all killers are OP, because at face value that's exactly what those words mean. But person 1 isn't exactly in the wrong for saying it in those words. Even though they're only referring to a select few killers being OP, we as humans value time, and that applies in our communication too. Think about it, if someone is just making an offhand comment, are they going to say, well, Nurse and Blight are undoubtedly overpowered, and a few other killers skirt the line at times, going up and down depending on various factors like maps, builds, and RNG, but there are some killers who are in a fine position balance-wise, with others even being notably weak, but nobody ever plays the weak killers, so I only ever end up playing against the overpowered ones. Or are they going to save their breath and simply say, killers are OP? And on the opposite side, is somebody going to say, while the strength of loops and chases varies quite dramatically depending on the map and the RNG of which loops spawned, the speed at which generators can be repaired often means that no matter how unlucky the RNG is or how quickly a killer can end chases, if survivors simply prioritize repairing gens over anything else, they should secure a 3-man escape no matter what against most killers in the roster with very few exceptions, such as Nurse and Blight, which therefore means survivors are overpowered. Or are they going to say something like survivors are OP or gen rushing is OP? Yes, if we take these things literally, then the people making the blanket statements are wrong for not thoroughly articulating their opinions. But once again, humans value time. Most people aren't going to be bothered to write a whole Harry Potter book every time they want to throw their 2 cents in, and even fewer people are going to actually read it, so you can't really blame them. But let's say that everyone's on the same page and there are no misunderstandings. One person's experiences with the game can be wildly different even if we're all talking about the same killer. Take someone like Wesker for example. Most people might say that he's a pretty fun killer that has a lot more options than someone like Myers or Legion, but he shouldn't be absolutely annihilating survivors every single match. Others might say that he's actually pretty miserable to play against and that he almost always gets at least a 3k and it feels incredibly overbearing to deal with him. Now, before you jump to declare one opinion correct and accusing the other side of being a biased XYZ main, take a moment to consider what gameplay choice choice that a killer could choose to do, or not do, that would have an absolutely monumental effect on the state of that match: tunneling. Tunneling, or focusing down one particular survivor until they're out of the game, is an incredibly powerful strategy, and is by far the most efficient way of winning a killer match. But while it is incredibly powerful, it's also incredibly unfun for the rest of the players in the lobby, so many players choose not to do it out of honor, sort of like a "I won't ruin your fun if you don't ruin mine" type of thing. Regardless of what your view of tunneling is, there are two objective facts regarding it. 1. Tunneling is part of the game. In fact, it's the most effective way for killers to play. 2. Tunneling is extremely unfun to play against. Because of these two facts, everyone has their own opinion on whether you should do it or not. I have one, you have one, which you've probably already typed in the comments by now, and depending on what your opinion is, what you do when you play killer will vary, and what survivors on the receiving end will experience will vary too. This causes us to have two completely different versions of balance existing at the same time: tunnel balance and non-tunnel balance. So returning back to that Wesker example from earlier, if you play Wesker and tunnel every single game, your opinion on how strong he is will likely be much higher than somebody who plays him without tunneling. And this isn't anything against him in particular, this applies to literally any character in the game. But why is tunneling even a question? Why is it not a cut and dry yes or no decision that everyone can agree on? Well, in the pro tunneling camp, it's literally a part of the game. It's not a glitch or an exploit or anything like that, it's simply a way of playing the game. The most direct path to victory, in fact. The faster you get a survivor out of the match, the less pressure they apply to gens and the less likely they are to escape. So what's the point in not completing the objective of killing said survivor? But on the flip side, it completely ruins the fun for the survivors, and to be honest, it isn't particularly exciting from the killer's point of view either. At the end of the day, it's a game, and we're all playing it to have fun. Of course, we all want to win, but if everybody played this game without honor, then it would have died a long time ago. It's simply not refined enough. You wouldn't like it if someone else ruined the game for you, so it doesn't hurt to give the same respect to other players too. So depending on which one of those two sides you agree with, your opinion of balance is going to be based on the assumption that they're played using the playstyle you subscribe to. And on the opposite side, gen rushing. Yes, gen rushing is a silly term, but again, humans value time, and it's a very time-effective way of saying the act of survivors repairing generators as quickly as possible and ignoring optional side quests like totems and chests. Gen rushing and tunneling are two sides of the same coin. Both playstyles refer to a role completing their objective in the most efficient time possible. Tunneling is focusing on one survivor to kill them as quickly as possible before doing the same with the next survivor, rinse and repeat. Gen rushing is focusing on repairing generators as quickly as possible and wasting as little time while doing so. It's just as unfun for the person on the receiving end as tunneling is. It's unfun for the killer as the match is over before they even had a chance to do anything. And it isn't particularly fun for survivors either, as it's just watching a bar fill up. And the same arguments for and against tunneling apply to gen rushing too. It's the most efficient way of winning the match, but it ruins the game for the opponent. So again, anybody's view on balance is not only going to be based on the assumption of whether the killer is tunneling or not, but also based on whether or not the opponent's survivors are gen rushing. And again, you don't get to control your experience, which is what leads to such conflicting viewpoints. You don't get to decide if the killer is tunneling or not, and you don't get to decide if your teammates will actually repair generators. Even if you want to gen rush, if the other three randos decide they're gonna spend half the match doing chests or hiding in lockers the second the terror radius pops up, then not only are you not going to be able to gen rush, you're likely not going to be able to win at all. Which brings us to my next point. The game actively works against the player base. As with most games nowadays, Dead by Daylight has a form of skill-based matchmaking. Players get assigned a number to indicate their skill level, which goes up and down depending on whether they win or lose, called MMR, or matchmaking rank. The game then tries to pair you with teammates and enemies at a similar level, which should in theory give you matches where everyone's the same skill level, but in practice, it just doesn't work. The game very regularly pairs high skill players with people who are nowhere near that level, which creates a very unbalanced experience. How many matches have you played as Survivor where you've looped the killer for over 5 entire minutes just to see that not only did 0 gens pop, but none of your teammates even touched a gen at all? Or how many times have you introduced a friend to DBD and match after match they're paired against quad slowdown blights with 3,000 hours, or they try playing killer and get annihilated by a 4-man Sabo flashbang head-on squad, all with multiple thousands of hours each? You could be the best solo survivor in the world, but if the randos don't do gens, then you can kiss your chances of winning goodbye. While the matchmaking does try to make fair matches, even if it fails often, it only becomes actively working against the players when you add tomes into the equation. For those unfamiliar, tomes are a series of challenges available in-game that players can complete to earn rewards like blood points and iridescent shards. And while this isn't inherently bad, some of the quests are downright malicious and actively ruin the game for both sides. For example, take glyph challenges. Often, the game gives players the task of interacting with a glyph, a weird portal thing. The interaction only takes a second or two, but the glyph itself is completely invisible to the player until they're within a couple of meters of it, and it moves around. So the hard part is finding it. This means once given a glyph quest, players will often spend the entire match wandering around aimlessly looking for this thing, and considering that it moves and can end up relocating to a place they've already checked, it can take players a long time to find it. Match after match, walking around aimlessly looking for the glyph, not doing gens, not saving teammates, nothing. Everyone gets the same challenges too, so it's completely possible to have all 3 randos refusing to play the actual game in favour of finding their glyphs, and if they don't find the glyph that match, they'll do the same thing in the next match, and so on until they eventually find it. So the game effectively telling players to throw matches to find these things is definitely not a welcome addition. While there have been plenty of particularly notable moments in DBD's history that caused even more animosity between the player base, many of which I've already made videos about, it's these factors that have persisted consistently for years and shown no signs of going away. While some of these factors could be addressed very easily by the dev team, for example, not telling players to throw their matches for a quest, others are technically not even directly the game's fault and are instead really the community being unable to agree on playstyles. So in that case, how could that be fixed? Realistically, the solution is to make these unfun playstyles not be the most effective way of playing. You could debate for hours as to whether or not you should care about the other team's fun or not, but if the devs made it so that there was no real benefit to playing this way, then there'd literally be no reason to do it anymore. Killers wouldn't tunnel if it was actively throwing their game, and the same goes to gen rushing. While that's easy to say, actually making that a reality is not an easy task. What game mechanics could they introduce or adjust to incentivize alternate playstyles? The 2v8 anti-snowball mechanic might be a good start, but that's again more about preventing snowball than incentivizing nice play. What if maybe the killer gained a stack of movement speed for each survivor hooked once, but then lost a stack for each survivor in stage 2? That would make it more beneficial for the killer to spread out their attention for the sake of having more map and chase pressure, while also deterring them from using said movement speed to tunnel as they just lose it. As for fixing gen rush, that's a bit harder, because gens are so cut and dry, there's not much leeway room with them. The obvious answer is giving survivors extra objectives to do, but many point to totems and chests and say, we already have extra objectives. The issue with that is, they are entirely optional, which is zero help whatsoever. I'd love to see a world where gens are reduced to something like 60 seconds, but there's a secondary objective that must also be complete and takes long enough to be fair. Even something similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre could work, where an object like a valve is located somewhere on the map, and the survivors have to go get it and bring it back to a gas tank or something. What would your solution to tunneling and gen rushing be?